to be here tonight with you and to discuss the topic collaborative advantage. And I would like to take the hour that we have right now to find some guiding principles of collaboration in the different environments we are all working together. And also we have interesting speaker now based in Singapore with King Wang, some experience with Vladimir in Asia, but also tremendous experience from Christina from Worldwide Collaborations. And I would like to give the first question to Christina, whether you have an example of a collaboration in the past year, some unique project which you would like to highlight, which, yeah, you could say there was a guiding principle that you would like to take on for the next upcoming collaborations in the future. So, yeah, the first question to you, Christina.
Thank you, Yannick, and hi, everyone. Am I audible though? That's perfect. Yeah, so maybe a bit of background of our organization, because I think that is already a quite good example of collaboration, since Yunus Environment Hub is co-founded by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus from Bangladesh. And along with him, it's not just him as the co-founder, but there is an entire huge organization of several Grameen organizations that have pioneered social innovation solutions in Bangladesh, solutions for the bottom of the pyramid. And then there's myself, also along with Hans Reitz, which is a serial entrepreneur and social innovator in Germany, who co-founded Yunus Environment Hub with the objective of creating an organization that is 100% dedicated towards solving the environmental crisis by developing and supporting social business solutions. And we take a lot of inspiration from the work that Professor Yunus and the Grameen family has done in Bangladesh. Although our organization is based out of Germany, we function globally, and we often take the inspiration if we see a problem. Let's take the example of Germany, right? There is an issue that we are trying to solve. I often do look on how Professor Yunus and the Grameen family has solved that in Bangladesh, and make that conversion and adapt it to the local context. I think there's a lot that we can learn, especially also about let's say disadvantaged people. There's a great quote that Professor Yunus often mentions and says, like, the poorest people are the best entrepreneurs because they need to innovate every day in order to survive. And that's also one of our guiding principles. Huh? What we're doing is not charity. We are talking with people from eye to eye, like on the same level, not below someone or on top of them, just because they might not have the same education or might come from a disadvantaged background, but rather see what we can learn from them and to understand their context and then co-create solutions together with them.
Thank you, and I think this background you mentioned with Mr. Yunus is quite unique in that sense, and also his history and his story in itself. So thank you very much for this. Secondly, I would like to give the word to King Wang. What is one example you would like to highlight, and also based or linked to your current role? And you have a tremendous experience in strategic planning across several organizations, but what was it that brought you where you were, and what is the one thing you would say is extremely important when it comes to collaboration for you in your current role?
I found it to be extremely useful to try very hard. It's hard to remember to do so, but to try very hard to see if the first time you hear an idea from somebody else, no matter how different it is from yours or how it runs against what you believe in, to maybe as a start, try to build on the idea. And the reason you do that is, I think it forces you to keep an open mind. And as you try to build on the idea, you try to make it work, you're forced to try to find connections. And when you try to find connections, if you're not sure, you start clarifying. So if we do that, I found that it's much easier for you to understand where the other party is coming from, and to then bring those different ideas together. So I give a very recent example. It's about a year ago, between maybe 3 organizations. I do quite a bit of work in the research on the future of work. And we were working with my research organization, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is based in Germany, obviously, as well as a film production company. And we're trying to put together a video for the Creative Bureaucracy Festival held in Berlin every year, co-organized with the Falling Walls Foundation. And what was interesting was that we had some ideas, including the use of a comic and a cartoon that was unexpected in the video, which is normally seen as you have to be professional and has to be polished and so on. And I was game for the idea. We made it work, and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation was also game for the idea. In fact, stereotypes aside, the filming company was a bit concerned, because Germans, they tend to be more serious, right? Maybe they won't like the idea. I said, well, let's just try. And everybody tried and built on the idea, and that worked out very well. And we continue to use the video to this day. And it continues to get a lot of people interested in what we do and to understand what we do. So it's not only helped the 3 parties involved, it's also helped people outside, the external stakeholders, get a better grip of how 3 organizations can work together.
Thank you very much. And I like that a lot. Just go for ideas and take it serious and move on.
Yeah.
And I think when I hand the word to you now, Vladimir, for the first question, with you at Such Ventures, I would also say you work a lot with to be disrupted industries as well. When you go into new spheres, what are your experiences based now on the 2 inputs from Christina and King Wang? What would you like to add with your background?
Well, the collaborative aspect is there also for our kind of work. In a nutshell, what we do at Such Ventures, we raise funding for companies, specifically for deep tech companies that work on some kind of disruptive innovation. There is something very interesting technologically. There is a lot of commercial impact, but also very important, there is a wide-reaching, broad societal impact. And very frequently, our work is tied to the Sustainable Development Goals or similar programs, which I think is a super interesting part of innovation, which deserves more and more attention, especially now. And we mostly work with individual companies, but we also work with a lot of consortia. And that I find extremely interesting. And we've recently started working with a specific funding instrument, which is, we focus on Europe, but this funding instrument is also open to Asian countries, Singapore, South Korea. And it's extremely interesting to build this consortia together, working through the cultural differences and difference in approach and research methodologies, but also the plans on how to bring something to the market, how to commercialize that. And what I really like in designs of such instruments, that they really force this collaboration. And the outcome of such projects is this combination of companies jointly bringing something to the market, to the global market, both in Europe and in Asia in such cases. And that, I think, is the natural breeding ground for all kinds of interesting experiments and interesting solutions. And I personally think that's actually the right way to work on such complicated projects, especially if the ambition is global. Because if you're locked only on your market, and that's the one you understand, then the chances of you really having the global impact are, of course, much, much lower.
Thank you very much. And I think what you just mentioned, and that's what I also wanted to say with to be disrupted industry, this deep tech, these new ideas, and King Wang, you mentioned it with the first time you hear about the ideas. Did that always work with you, or what was a moment where you said, I should have stick to it more actively? You are on mute still.
Yes, I realized that. Yeah, still do it after a year plus. Yeah, amazing. Meaning, do I sometimes feel it was better to stick with the original idea? I think inevitably it would be, because there are times where not every idea you come by is better or worse, 100% of the time. And perhaps the important part is not who is right in terms of the idea, but that when you're dealing with complex and complicated projects, as what Vladimir mentioned, you kind of need to have a certain diversity of ideas to get started with. And I read about this technique recently that apparently, right, I was told in filmmaking and movie making, sometimes we are not quite sure what to do. It's better to throw out the bad version of an idea first and then refine it together. And then it becomes a good idea after that. And so perhaps the way to think about it is not whether the idea, whose idea was better or right from the beginning, but that you're just kickstarting the process. And if you want to have a good process, it's probably better to have an open mind, collaborative, that the odds of success are probably going to be higher.
I think it's not only about the ideas. What I really like about the project and in our line of work operate is that sometimes you have a very, very good idea which came from one set of circumstances or one context. And when you place in a completely different context, and I mean, bringing something from Europe to Asia and the other way around is absolutely perfect. Because you have different cultural background, different processes, different status quo, different expectations. And then the best moment is when what used to be an originally and beautiful idea starts breaking apart under the reality. And then you have to mend it or to think of something else. But overall, that makes the solution that stems out of that idea far more resilient than it was before. Because it just, when you put it in a completely different context and stress test it, you get a superior solution in any case.
Absolutely agree. Christina, you're nodding as well. What would you like to add on that?
I think not much to add from my side. I fully agree. I mean, the more diverse backgrounds you have that go into the development of solution, the better. What I often see in it's also the process that often you do forget to involve your target group, your customers, your beneficiaries for whom you're designing the solution too late, to rather onboard this process right from the beginning and try to find good formats on how to do this for stakeholder consolidation, co-creation, workshop sessions. I mean, there are various methods. That's what I would add as a key success factor, to also include the group for whom you're designing the solution.
When we take this idea a little bit further, we diverse ideas, fully agree on that. I think we agree also in this group now on the process to collaborate now also across borders, and we all have worked internationally. We have mentioned we are even different nationalities in this call. We work with, you mentioned Bangladesh, Christina, King Wong, you're based in Singapore. How is that with the different background and ideas? How does that come into the process of finding the best solution or the best way going forward? And then please, whoever would like to jump in first.
I think it depends where you are in the process. So if you're talking about the ideate, I mean, we probably need to scope it a little bit. It's quite broad. So we are talking about, a development of something, I assume from a certain idea, in a collaborative way, all the way to a project or a product or a service. So something that, is working and is used by a large number of people. And of course, as we discussed previously, you want to stress test it, to trial it with, as many groups as possible, of course, as long as these are your target groups. Again, referring to our line of work, when we deal with the early stage innovation, it still has to prove itself. What is specific about deep tech, why I personally like it very much, is that it's really at the early stages of development. It's yet super unclear what will show up after that. And that is inevitable, and that has to be this way, because a lot of interesting innovations that we now use, throughout our daily lives, they have surfaced like this, as something like some new invention which was not clear how to apply. I mean, think of BioNTech. When they started working, they had an interesting solution to a problem which did not exist at the moment, and lo and behold, now it's the breakthrough in vaccine development. So that's the way it works. And the trials are extremely important over here, because these kind of companies, they want to test what they're doing with completely different groups of potential customers and users, and understand, is there a fit, is it going to work? And of course, build on the feedback, which is a normal process of developing a solution, fixing it, iterating, that standard design process. I think what is quite interesting to do with is, of course, to which extent you can instrument this process, not just rely on some random outcomes. Because yes, if you have the luxury of working across different cultures, different countries, you have these things sort of naturally, right? They show up to you, you've learned them, you could apply something and you can immediately have them happen. I think to an extent, this process can be sort of automated. There are different techniques, how to try to bring this, different perspectives into your design process and have your process adjust to them. But what I think is super interesting when we look at this, and I think it's a development of what Christina was talking about when talking about the frugal entrepreneurs. I really like dropping the constraints on the company to work with, because it's easy to do a lot of things when your budget is unlimited, or you have access to so many resources, but that never really happens. But even if that happens, I think it's one of the important techniques is really to constrain it. But if you can't do this, or if this is removed, what will you do? How will you work? And to me, most interesting solutions, they actually appear from those moments when resources get removed and the companies are forced to survive and really fight with the resources they have.
Definitely personally agree on that as well. On especially the last point, King Wong, how do you see that in your environment?
Yeah, maybe let me touch on maybe the education part, because so far we've been talking about people working together across cultures, and perhaps a recent example is instructive. The importance of building that certain inclination to be open and to be curious about other cultures as a starting point. We did a project just about a month ago. We completed a project about a month ago where we had students about 14, 15 years old from 3 different countries, China, Australia, Singapore, had to work on something that to do with sustainability, such as how do you get more young people interested to pick up the scientific concepts behind sustainability, because you can be passionate about sustainability, but to solve the problems, you need to start building up your scientific base and understanding. And they gave all their presentations, and then we ran a debrief, just a feedback session. We thought they'd be asking questions about, the science or the sustainability. And when the 3 schools and the 3 groups of international students had a chance to talk to each other, the most interesting question they asked each other was, what do you have in your canteen? And, why is it that when you did your presentation about get your canteen going green, it sounded like you had a choice of food, right? Rather than being served a menu and you have no choice. And that led to them discussing how the systems and the canteen system was a bit different in China, different in Australia, and different in Singapore. And they were kind of envious of each other, in some ways. But it was remarkable because, you thought they'll be interested in the sustainability stuff, but it turns out that they want to understand these other things, the way that people live. And it made me think that maybe if we want to start getting people to be open-minded about other cultures, maybe that's how you start. You start with being curious about how each other live. Because at some level, science is the same anywhere around the world. And what is needed is not different science, because there's no different science per se. There's the same concepts, but really just same science but different cultures. And if you start early by looking at how different people live, they get a better appreciation, and it becomes second nature after a while. That they need to understand each other better. And maybe I would say that I don't think we do that well enough in schools. Even up to university, you go to a classroom, you go to school with your classmates, and it's the same set of classmates in your school for the next 3-4 years, right? Your degree program. We don't really get people to reach across geographical boundaries, except if they go for an exchange or a study trip of some sort.
Christina, I think also you worked, you mentioned at the beginning, working with people from different education level, completely different cultures. How do you react on King Wong's statement right now? How do you see that?
Well, I mean, I would in general agree with him. Like the intercultural communication and understanding is, I think, the basis for peace on our globe. That's the most crucial thing from which we can build upon, and from which we can draw a lot of conclusion and benefits also when we're looking at other societal issues that we are confronted with. And as he was saying, you know, often we are through our socialization, we are kind of put into a box, into a system that is normal for us, and everything else seems so unusual, so unconventional, and strange in a way, and that we often don't even think that solutions outside that system could exist or could work. And I think breaking this up through intercultural exchange, dialogues or collaborations can then open up new ways of how things are being looked at, on how things are being done. And especially if we're looking at the grand global challenges with the climate crisis. If we're always going the same way, it will not lead us to new solutions, right? We need to find those new paths. And I think there again, it's very crucial that we, on the one hand side, we analyze the problems in the local context, and then get expertise that needs to come. And what we often see, if I'm taking a concrete example, we've been working on national action plastic plans, helping governments and countries to improve municipal solid waste management, so we don't see that much plastic waste going into our environment, into the oceans. And what we often see in the local context is that technology is missing, investments is missing, know-how is missing, so that there needs to be a transfer also of these type of components. But it doesn't help if you're bringing a high-tech solution from country A to country B if then nobody is able to manage a machine, a technology, or maintain it. So it requires this exchange, this dialogue, this collaboration of bringing solutions that then need to be adapted to the local context, trialed out locally, and being handed over so it can be managed on these local grounds. So this is something that I would also see as an example from our work on how we work. If we are being called to tackle one issue in a particular country, the first thing we do is we go and travel there. We familiarize ourselves with it, and we hire a local project management team that has and understands the cultural background, the customs, and then get from the global side the particular expertise that is needed in order to solve the problem, and co-develop together the respective solution or business model, for example.
Yeah, maybe let me add to, what Christina said just reminded me of every now and then when we work with students or we work with groups of professionals, and let's say they need to work on a project in a location or in a company or industry that they've not had some experience with. So some of them increasingly are worried that they come in as helicopter consultants, right? They call it helicopter experts who have never been there, right? And I want to say that that's very true. We got to be careful. And what Christina has said is an excellent way to get a feel of the ground. I think the flip side is also true. So it's this sort of interesting balance that we need to strike. Because what I told the students in one project was that, in a mix of students and professionals, I told them that you need to be careful that just because you don't know the place doesn't mean you don't have good ideas, or that you are stuck. Because for many of us, there will always be a first time you do something, right? And if you're always stuck and you're frozen just because it's the first time, you'll never move forward. So your goal must be to try your best to understand as much as possible before you get to the ground, to form some sort of an idea that you can use as a proxy. And once you have a proxy, when you go to the place, it might actually make your learning more powerful when you go to the ground, because you may have a certain set of assumptions or expectations about what you see based on what you've read and what you've found out. But it's not the case. Usually you learn the most when your expectations are confounded, right? And when you find that they run counter to what you thought would happen, this is when you register and the learning is the deepest. So I would suggest that that would be another technique that we could have. Go down to the ground, talk to people, but make sure you do your homework too, and pay special attention to those areas where your expectations were confounded, because I think those are the most important learning lessons.
you can never underestimate the importance of anthropologic studies when working with a new locality. I remember when I was starting working in Malaysia, I used to spend my very lengthy intercontinental flights from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. And instead of watching, the usual set of blockbusters, I mean, I would probably do one, but it's like a 12-hour flight. I would then go to the section, with soap operas and then the series. And I would watch like Indian, Malaysian, the most obscure ones. But that gave me quite a good setup of basic memes, which were important for conversations. So I do enjoy that. I think it's super, super important. And I agree that, when you work in something complex, of course, you need the helicopter people, like these flying doctors, maybe with not immediate relevant experience on this particular locality, but have a lot of extra experience from other places. When you mix them together, that's the way it works best. But I was also thinking, when listening to you, sort of thinking of the Future Cities Summit, in the end, I see that more and more cities, especially the bigger cities, are becoming more and more multicultural. And then I think that's an expectation, right, for a lot of cities of big size now, that you have all these cultures, you have this melting pot, and that's where you draw a lot of energy and inspiration from. But I'm wondering, as we have more and more of such cities, it seems that it's no longer kind of an advantage to attract people. You can just say, well, we are more international than another city. Singapore is more international than I don't know, Tokyo, or probably it's more international Tokyo or mix. But pick a pair. And I think we're talking about the city marketing and how the cities are attractive, for the people, especially people you want to attract. That's becoming more and more complicated. And even I would argue that in many cases, next to this multiculturality, which people expect, there is still kind of a dominant, core local cultural identity that a lot of people like and can relate to. And in the end, what drives their choice, I know a lot of friends who say like, Barcelona is my city because it's Barcelona, because it's in Spain. And a lot of people would swear by, again, by Tokyo or by Paris. So it's kind of multicultural competition, but still there is a very important default culture that people are attracted to.
I think it's a good example, and we all probably live in multicultural cities. Looking at this group, and King Wong, what you mentioned as well, or first, like we agree on the diversity of ideas. We know that there's a process, and I think Vladimir, you mentioned it quite well. We need a certain helicopter view as well, but it's for me also an added value on diversity of thoughts. Now, me also the question before then. The first question from the audience came up before I jump over to this one. Maybe why do we not work like this more often? Like King Wong, you mentioned it, but well, we should do, but we know it, we agree on it, and it's also, if you look at academia, people agree that diverse teams are performing better. Why are we not doing it more consequently? I would say not more often, but.
Yeah, I would say that think of it like a muscle. If you want to do it and be good at it, you're going to use it often. But if you don't get many opportunities in school and at work to practice it, then you're not going to use that muscle. Let me use an analogy. In Singapore, we go through a bilingual education. But for many of us, we're much stronger in our English because it's the language of administration, and is, in a sense, it's the language used in schools and in the workplace. And for many of us, if we end up using English most of the time, our what we call our mother tongue, whether it's Chinese, Mandarin, or Malay or Tamil, in this case of the large percentage of the Indian population, if you don't use it as much, you find that your ability to use it deteriorates. But the funny thing is that once you get the chance to use it, it comes back very quickly, right? So it doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear. So I think it's the best way to think about it is a muscle, right? And if, let's say, in some jobs, if you spend 10 years of your life working largely only with the local population, it may be a bit of a shock if you enter a more international setting, right? But then again, if you've been exposed to it before, maybe as a student or in some parts of your early career, it will come back, right? So maybe if you don't get the chance to do it in the school setting or the workplace setting, is to go online or find some way, right, to get that international interactions that are so critical to keeping that muscle strong and better with each year and with each interaction.
I agree with King Wang's logic over here. I don't think that I agree with the metaphor, because I think it's before it becomes a muscle. You have to discover that it exists. If I think of my personal example, I think it's more like a virus, for like a worse or better example. You have to get exposed and infected by this, and sort of to treat, this is the way you deal with things. I'm more comfortable working in international environment with different kinds of people, different cultures, and I really want to see that clash happening. And that's, for me personally, that's one of the things why I enjoy working so much in Asia, is because this constant exposure to new things, and this, this feeling of satisfying curiosity, like every single day, in KL or in Singapore, there's going to be something that I had no idea about, and it's extremely pleasurable to figure that out. And there are a lot of people like that, and I hope, the number of these people increase and increase. But I think it's also a bit of luck, right? You have to get exposed to that. And then we're back to the story of whether the cities, like as a whole or through individual verticals in education, in professional environments, create sufficient opportunity for such intermixing. And of course, it's easier for cities and areas with strong multiracial backgrounds, because that's obviously the natural advantage of that. I think it's trickier in more homogeneous societies, and that's something I would like to see changing, especially in Eastern Europe, which is where I'm coming from.
Maybe to you over Christina, talking to people in completely different areas, how do they react when you come in with completely ideas from another end of the world? Like, I'm just metaphorical, of course, but how do they react sometimes? Do they appreciate that, or is there first also a little bit pushback at the beginning, or how do you experience that?
I mean, usually we don't come in with ready-made ideas, as I was saying previously, right? We rather go in and listen first. Let's say, take the example of a city. We are invited. We would first listen to the city. What are the challenges you're facing with? What are your needs? And then it's rather us, we would be designing a process through which we would help them to discover and co-create solutions together. Because I believe it wouldn't work if we would tell them, this is the solution, this will work. Like, I mean, how we would not be in that position, because we are not living in that city. So the citizens or the municipal officials are the ones who to judge upon that better. And with regards to the question that you said, why does collaboration not happen more often? I think in many organizations and companies, language and the cultural barrier is a barrier. You still have many who are, who work in their own bubble in their native language. And even though if they speak English, you're not speaking the same language. And you need to get to this multicultural understanding what the other person says by knowing more about the culture. And for that, you need to be exposed to that culture. Yep. And that's what King Wan was saying. It's something that needs to be developed, that needs to grow. And in terms of cities, with regards to this conference here, I think maybe there's also, I don't know, maybe a lack of platforms where these connections could be made, because I'm sure there are cities that would love to have more collaborations, but they don't know how can we communicate this, or how can we find collaborators in other places. So maybe this is also something that can be explored further during this conference here, or what comes out of that, on how such a dialogue, or I don't know if it's the platform or what is missing, but I believe maybe there is this link often in between, that you have interested parties, but they're not coming together. So maybe this is something that could be looked at.
Thank you. I'll also take this chance now to take up the first question which came in. How do we really incorporate sustainability concepts? What's the role of collaboration and reconciliation to build joint efforts for a more resilient world? Like, also another question is, if I understand it correctly a little bit, like, how do we really, for more sustainable cities, to make the link to the conference, how do you really incorporate those projects? What's the key measure? We talked about diverse teams, backgrounds, intercultural understanding, and I think we can all agree that this adds value to the solution. But how do we really incorporate the solution for a city with and Vladimir, you mentioned the big cities, mainly with a couple of million people living in it, so also diverse stakeholders, multiple stakeholders. How do we incorporate those solutions? How do we make them happen? What's the key for that?
I think on one hand, it's very difficult to answer this question because it's a very high level question. Like, what's the silver bullet over here?
Of course.
I think it's one of those questions where sort of the way it's phrased sort of sets you on the false path. But I think in reality, it's actually quite simple because you don't need anyone's permission to incorporate anything in your work. And there are programs and plans, the SDGs and the Green Deal and all other initiatives which are absolutely public, and a lot of people spend time thinking about them or planning or seeing what is potentially feasible. And then nothing really prevents anyone or a company or institution to choose this is exactly this is precisely what we want to do in our work. This is a certain aspect of unsustainability, something that irks us or we think is not fair or equitable. Just want to fix that. And once you start working the problem, there is no shortage of SDGs or other benchmarks you can link to that. And of course, they have a very nice presentation slide. It's fully aligned with these programs. So as always, I don't think it makes sense to start from that high level of story. You start from very local, what Christina was saying, grassroots. What is the problem I'm solving? And what is the problem that I care so much about that I'm going to endure all the difficulties and all the suffering and all the limited resources before it makes, before it works and starts becoming a success? And I think, Muhammad Yunus's story is actually exactly the same kind of a story. All the interesting stories start like this.
I would say it requires a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches. With regards to the topic of waste management and how we can turn our current linear economic model into a circular economy, we have formed a partnership, a so-called WasteWise partnership, together with UN Habitat, the International Solid Waste Association, the Norwegian Waste Association, and Yunus Environment Hub, where we basically approach it with this mixed method approach. That on the one hand side, we have UN Habitat and the International Solid Waste Association, who works with the municipalities on capacity building. What we often see is that the officers within the departments in charge for that often lack the know-how, how to get there. And together with them, they're consulting on the development of national or municipal waste action plans. And on the other hand side, Yunus Environment Hub, we are focused on the private sector, bottom up, on creating social business ventures, on enabling young people, entrepreneurs, innovators, companies, on how they could utilize their creativity, their know-how, on setting up ventures that are particularly focused on circular business solutions, which can be across the entire value chain, from how to prevent waste, how to create reuse, refurbishment options, to the waste collection and the recycling in the end. So I think having these both approaches, top down and bottom up, is really what is needed to make a systemic change within a city.
But that is actually, I fully agree that it's such an easy way to find something interesting to work on. Take an existing supply chain and try to convert it from a linear to circular. There's so many opportunities over there. Pick any, especially in waste. Waste is like my favorite.
Yeah,
mine too.
Maybe just to add a couple of sentences to this is, completely agree with Vladimir and Christy and I. Maybe at the local level, once you get down to rubber hits the road, right, and you're trying to do something, maybe it's always important to ask yourself, who is benefiting from this and why would they care about this? If you can answer these two questions, I think you're on your way to figuring out and making people care.
It's only, I think, for me to drop in one more thing. So, may?
Yeah, of course, please go ahead.
I wanted to say, I was thinking of all the recent examples. I think it's super interesting, talking about how to build something sustainable and how to make a foothold over there. It's super interesting to prove that something is possible and to put a little bit of pressure on the status quo. And one of my most favorite examples is with repairing things, because we slowly went from being able to repair stuff to not being able to repair anything. And if you look at, all the modern electronics, and complicated equipment, it's sold to you as is, and you can do nothing with it. You have these iFixit tear down reviews when they assign the scores, and you take a contemporary iPhone, you cannot do anything with it, which is a beginning of a large number of problems, with electronic waste and non-recyclability and things like that. But there were people trying to show, we can build a phone which is disassemblable. That's what the Dutch company Fairphone did. There were guys working on the laptops, and lo and behold, Apple has finally, succumbed to this pressure. They're now making it possible to repair something. Dell has announced recently there's a new model of a laptop which people can repair themselves. And there was somebody just before who showed that it's actually possible to do that. And I think we do need a lot and a lot more of projects and initiatives like that. Even if they don't succeed at the moment of inception, that's okay, because this pressure, it's like drop by drop, this pressure builds up, and then there is no way back for large companies well here who make a lot of choices that affect us.
Absolutely, and I just want to go into one example again a little bit more. You Christina and King Wong mentioned this waste management. You mentioned as well, Vladimir, waste manager working with the municipality, working with you, Christina, as the knowledge hub for new solutions. And their cities are, again, one of the best examples, because they're probably in itself super complex and one of the biggest environments to get the solutions done. Now, talking about those collaborations, my feeling is that this form of holistic, inclusive collaboration it didn't exist for the last 50 years or something. It appeared more recently. Am I right or am I wrong? And also then the question, okay, how will this develop in the next couple of years?
So it didn't happen at the scale that we're looking at. And the simple answer to that is just communications. Right? I mean, the other contributing factors like an increasingly educated population and increasingly well-traveled population, but it's really the communications of it all. And you could argue that even before there was collaboration on sustainability and all, manufacturers were distributing activities around the world and coordinating supply chains at a massive and complicated scale, right? So I think that's what it is. Where we will go in the future is in fact an interesting question that I've been trying to answer ever since the pandemic hit us and we all work from home. I think we're generally quite okay coordinating on certain activities and tasks when it comes to the activities we need to do at work. There are still things that we're not so good doing virtually over geographical distances when we're not face-to-face in the same location. I would say that really, really deep collaboration is still a bit challenging. The type where you need to have creativity, constant back and forth of ideas, where being present in the same space is quite critical. So I think what would be interesting would be how far we can take what the digital technologies can do to replicate some of those things that, as of today, will still best be done in person. I don't think we'll ever get to 100%, but there's lots of potential for us to push it a little bit more so that we have all more opportunities to solve problems on a global scale by coordinating at a global scale.
Yeah, I think in recent years, we have also seen a huge movement from rural areas to cities, right? Especially in developing and emerging economies because of distracted livelihoods on the countryside, because of loss of jobs, because of climate change that forced people to migrate. And that's why cities are more and more overwhelmed with issues that are created out of these developments. And that probably also fostered the need for collaboration, the need for solutions and of working together. And I guess that trend might also continue. And which I think in general is also important to reverse and to see on how we can actually ensure that people can live where where they are, including on the rural on the countryside, and trying to see on how we can bring basic services also to these remote areas, which could also come from cities. So I think there's on that aspect, I think we will need to see in the future and how things develop, depending also on how we will steer those developments.
Thank you. And before I give the word to you, Vladimir, just for the audience, please post a question into the chat so I can take them up into the discussion. Vladimir, what's your view on the collaboration now and for the future as well?
I was listening to King Wang and thinking about indeed how the new digital tools have affected us the past year, almost 2 years now. And I think if we sort of set aside why we're using them and also the fatigue to an extent, especially for those people who spend a lot of their time in Zoom meetings, I think the democratization of collaboration has been immense. I mean, now you can reach out to anyone, in a number of steps. You can find any email address, you can find people on social networks, and you can actually trigger that collaboration. I still think a lot of people are underusing that because, it never hurts. You can reach out to any person and try to set something up, something meaningful. So I think that is a major opportunity. That's something that was not there before. I personally use it a lot. If I do some research and I find an interesting expert, the first thing I do, I reach out to that expert and just figure out whether we can work on something together. And I would encourage all people to do the same because it's the easiest way to start something running. And that person can be anywhere in the world. It no longer matters because if you're having conversation like this, it doesn't really matter whether you're in the same town or on different continents. The other thing which is troubling me, and of course it's also not news, in terms of the filter bubbles, of course, that unfortunately all the social networks and other tools that we use are creating. And I don't really like, of course, how we are under influence of that. And I do think there is a need for platforms or solutions which should be more focused on such discovery of collaboration opportunities. I think that there is room, for lots of interesting. What I like, what is happening right now is this emergence of completely new, completely ridiculous, you can even say, social elevators, with TikTok, which is, a lot of weird stuff. But I mean, one person I was reading about recently, I thought was amazing. It was a lady who specialized in Excel, and she made like such a major TikTok presence by doing fun things about Excel. I mean, if you can do it about Excel, like the most boring thing in the world, you can do it about waste, you can do it about construction, you can do it carbon capture, you can do it about anything. It's just probably it's easier, to do. But maybe I wouldn't even argue it's easier. I would really like to see, people like this Miss Excel, like Miss Waste, Miss Wastewater Treatment Facility or Mr. Wastewater Treatment Facility, doesn't matter, emerging and really creating lots of viral content, exposing people to interesting stuff, whatever it is. And that's what I would like to see happening more and more, because that's going back to our story about muscle exposure. If we're able to capture the imagination and the interest of a lot of people, especially younger people, with what can be done, that's going to be pretty good, and if there is a possibility to some kind of follow-up and collaborate. But for that, I would argue we do have an infrastructure and it's growing, globally, the early stage incubators and accelerators and programs, which actually help people formulate what they have as a kind of idea or intent and bring it to the next level. So if we can have more interesting things happening on the ideation level, sort of going back to where we started, I think it'd be pretty, pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I think, Christina, if I understood you correctly, you used to talk of an increasing demand for collaboration based also through migration and other things. Vladimir, you said there's an increasing supply as well with different LinkedIn, whatever you mentioned. We have platforms who go into this direction. Well, I have an economy background, so this is pretty good way forward, so that we increase the collaboration and find solutions for the pressing problems on sustainability, but also on the problems we mentioned the cities have with circular economy. Well, I could be pretty optimistic. How do you see that? Maybe King Wang first.
How do I see where all these challenges are heading?
No, where also the solutions and an increasing demand and increased supply, and how are they heading? Is it positive for us that we find the solution that the cities are facing, the cities in terms of sustainability, waste management are facing? will the collaboration increase to find the right solution for the most pressing problems?
I'm optimistic for the simple fact that we recognize the problem, enough people recognize the issues, and enough people want to do something together. I won't be able to predict how we'll solve the problem, but I have a good sense that you have the necessary ingredients and that we're likely to be able to tackle the problems. Even in energy, I don't know how far the discussion has gone, but there are a lot of advances in nuclear energy that has just kind of slipped under the radar, because of some of the crises and accidents in the 2000s and early 2010s. But there are some interesting developments there. Some countries have publicly announced plans, and if it's safe, that would create tremendous amount of clean energy for a lot of our needs. And it's people who are prepared to work at the problem, tackle one thing at a time, and to overcome it. So I'm generally optimistic for those reasons, and I like to believe that we've come so far as in the last 200 years, simply because we chose to make things better for each other.
Christina?
I mean, I would say I'm optimistic because I like to be an optimist, but only in the sense that that especially the young generation is empowered through technology, and there are a lot of opportunities for forming movements, creating initiatives, reaching out to governments, to municipalities, which was not there before. So the current generation is the most powerful in the history when it comes to that regard. When it comes to waste management, I wouldn't be that optimistic. Currently, 3.5 billion people don't have access to waste management services. That's half of the world's population. That's how far we are behind. So this requires massive attention, resources, and collaboration to solve the problem. And it will not be done overnight. So this will take some more time. But if we put attention to it, and I would rather also use this as a call for action also to cities to put that topic high on their agenda, because I believe there are interested innovators, organizations such as ours out there to help cities to overcome them and really take the problem serious and start working on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I like this call to action, and also I wanted to give the word to Vladimir, but I think the internet connection broke. Also running like toward the end of the session, before handing over or back to you, Andre, the call to action from Christina King Wong. How do you what do you take from it? What can you do in your global collaboration to make that happen?
Christina, you want to go first? I can go first too. I just thought it was a nice follow-up to what you said.
Just as a last closing statement as well, before I hand back to Andre.
I mean, for us, one of our plans in the WasteWise partnership that I mentioned earlier is that we want to set up so-called city labs, where we are looking for cities that are open for the concept, that want to invite us, where we then set up a creative laboratory where each of the 4 different partners that I mentioned would be present, and where both this mix of top-down and bottom-up strategies can be implemented with the local presence. So that would be my follow-up.
I was just going to say that start by finding a problem you feel you can solve it, then find the next bigger problem that's slightly bigger than the small problem you started with, solve it, then find the next bigger problem, and at some stage you'll find you'll be solving a global problem.
Thank you. And I see that Vladimir is back. Vladimir,
yeah, sorry, I got kicked out.
No worries at all.
I always advise people like what to do, how to recover from a call where I get kicked out. And I was running my own routine, quickly switching to different network.
Well, happens. Just also from your side a little bit, a call to action or to solve the most pressing problems. Also based on our discussion now. What's your closing statement?
Well, I think I was lamenting the lack of the platforms, but of course we're here with the Future Cities Summit, and it's not the first year it's running. So I do think one of the reasons why I like it very much and I've been collaborating for years is because I think this is a kind of platform we need that attracts a lot of people from different countries, with different expertise and exposure, different age groups, and there are lots of interesting initiatives spawning from that. I think we got a bit paused by the pandemic, like everything. I think that's the reality, but I do think that's the right way to develop, because the more you can bring and mix such interesting people, the more things will start just sparking by the nature of it. And of course the cultural backgrounds play a very, very important role over here, and they do help. On the other hand, when I was in university, I was a member of the European Youth Parliament, and we had the running joke over there, which was join the European Youth Parliament and get your national stereotypes confirmed. So there are two ways of learning over there.
Thank you. Well, it's probably true. And
I think so.
Living in Europe, I can say that. Yes, thank you so much, King Wang, Vladimir, and Christina for joining. It was a pleasure talking to you. I think also for the audience, start collaborate more. I think that's part of the solution for our global challenges we face at the moment. But before I talk too long, I give the word back to you, Andre, also for a short wrap up. And yeah, thank you very much again. It was a pleasure being here. And
thanks, Yannick.
Wish you all a great afternoon or a great night.